The old truck bumped along the dirt road, kicking up dust clouds that made David squint through the windshield. He had been driving for almost an hour now, following a hand-drawn map that looked like it was made by a child. The social services office had given him this case 3 days ago. Someone had called about a family living in terrible conditions way out here in the countryside, but nobody had bothered to check on them yet. David pulled over and checked the map again. According to this, there should be a small path leading into the woods somewhere around here. He looked around and saw nothing but tall grass and old fence posts. Just when he was about to give up and head back to town, he spotted tire tracks leading through a gap in the trees. The path was barely wide enough for his truck. Branches scraped against the windows as he drove slowly forward. After about 10 minutes, the trees opened up into a small clearing. What he saw there made his stomach drop. There was a tiny wooden hut that looked like it might fall down any minute. The roof had holes covered with pieces of old plastic that flapped in the wind. One wall was completely black with mold, and the front door hung crooked on broken hinges. This wasn't a house. This was barely a shelter. David sat in his truck for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. In his 5 years as a social worker, he had seen some pretty rough living situations. But this was different. This was like something from 100 years ago. How could anyone be living here in this day and age? He grabbed his clipboard and got out of the truck. The smell hit him immediately. It was a mix of dampness, decay, and something else he couldn't identify. As he walked closer to the hut, he could hear voices inside. Children's voices. David approached the single window carefully. The glass was so dirty and cracked that he could barely see through it. He wiped away some of the grime with his sleeve and peered inside. What he saw made his heart stop. A woman was sitting on the floor with 3 small children around her. They looked like they were having some kind of meal, but David couldn't believe what they were eating. The woman had a loaf of bread in her hands, and she was carefully scraping something green and fuzzy off each slice before handing it to the children. Mold. She was scraping mold off bread and feeding it to her kids. The children didn't complain. They just took their pieces of bread and ate them quietly, like this was completely normal. The oldest child, a girl who looked about 10 years old, was helping her mother clean the bread. Her little hands moved expertly, like she had done this many times before. David felt sick to his stomach. These children were so hungry that moldy bread seemed like a feast to them. He watched as the youngest boy, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, ate his piece of bread with the kind of focus that only comes from real hunger. The woman looked exhausted. Her clothes were dirty and hung loose on her thin frame. Her hair was tied back with what looked like a piece of string. But even in this terrible situation, David could see that she was trying to take care of her children. She was giving them the bigger pieces of bread and taking the smallest piece for herself. As David watched, the little girl suddenly looked up and saw him at the window. Her eyes went wide with fear as she grabbed her mother's arm. "Mama," she whispered, pointing toward the window. The woman looked up and saw David's face pressed against the glass. Instead of being angry or scared, she just looked embarrassed. She quickly tried to hide the moldy bread behind her back, as if she could somehow pretend this wasn't happening. David stepped back from the window and took a deep breath. He had to go inside and talk to this family, but he wasn't sure what to say. How do you start a conversation with someone who is living in conditions like this? He walked to the front door and knocked gently. The door moved under his hand, and he realized it wasn't even properly closed. The whole thing was so warped and broken that it couldn't shut all the way. "Hello?" he called out softly. "My name is David. I'm from social services. I'm here to help." There was silence from inside the hut. Then he heard whispering. The children were asking their mother what social services meant. She was telling them to be quiet and stay close to her. David waited a few more seconds, then carefully pushed the door open a little bit. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," he said. "I just want to make sure you're okay." The inside of the hut was even worse than he had imagined. There was no electricity, no running water, and no heat. The floor was just dirt covered with some old blankets. In one corner there was a single mattress that looked like it had been rescued from a garbage dump. All four family members, obviously, slept on that one mattress. The woman was still sitting on the floor with her children, clustered around her like baby birds protecting themselves from a predator. She looked at David with a mixture of fear and resignation, like she had been expecting this day to come. "Please don't take my children," she said quietly. "I know this looks bad, but I'm doing the best I can." David's heart broke when he heard those words. This woman wasn't neglecting her children on purpose. She was trying desperately to take care of them with absolutely nothing to work with. "What's your name?" David asked, sitting down on the floor so he wouldn't tower over them. "Maria," she said after a long pause, "and these are my children, Sofia, Carlos, and Miguel." David looked at the three children. Sofia was the oldest, the one who had spotted him at the window. She had big brown eyes and was obviously trying to be brave for her little brothers. Carlos looked about 8 years old and was holding tight to his mother's hand. Miguel, the youngest, was coughing softly and looked pale and thin. "How long have you been living here, Maria?" David asked gently. Maria looked down at the floor. 3 months, she whispered. "Maybe 4, I lost track." David looked around the hut again, trying to figure out how anyone could survive here for even one day, let alone months. There was no kitchen, no bathroom, no furniture except for that terrible mattress. A few plastic bags in the corner seemed to hold all their possessions. "What happened?" David asked. "How did you end up here?" Maria was quiet for a long time. Then slowly she began to tell her story. Her husband had died in an accident at his construction job 8 months ago. The company said it wasn't their fault and refused to pay any compensation. Without his income, Maria couldn't afford rent on their apartment. She tried to find work, but with no one to watch the children and no money for childcare, it was impossible. They had been evicted from their apartment and had nowhere else to go. A friend told her about this abandoned hut in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping on the streets with 3 young children. As Maria talked, David noticed more and more details that made the situation even more heartbreaking. The children's clothes were too small and had holes in them. Their shoes were falling apart. Miguel's cough was getting worse, and David suspected the damp, moldy conditions were making him sick, but what struck him most was how quiet and well-behaved the children were. They weren't running around or being loud like most kids their age. They just sat close to their mother, listening to every word she said to this stranger who had appeared at their door. David realized that these children had learned to be invisible. They had learned that making noise or asking for things might bring unwanted attention or get them in trouble. They had learned to be grateful for moldy bread because moldy bread was better than no bread at all. Looking at this family, David made a decision that would change all their lives forever. He couldn't let them spend another night in this terrible place. He couldn't drive back to his comfortable office and file a report while these children slept on a dirty mattress in a hut that wasn't fit for animals. He looked directly at Maria and spoke with more confidence than he had felt in years. "Pack your things," he said firmly. "You're coming with me." Maria stared at David like he had just spoken in a foreign language. Pack your things? What did that even mean? And who was this man to come into her home and start giving orders? "Excuse me?" she said, her voice getting sharper. She pulled her children closer to her, and David could see the fear in her eyes. "You can't just walk in here and tell us what to do." David realized how his words must have sounded. Like some government official coming to tear this family apart. He held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That came out wrong. I'm not here to take your children away from you. I'm here to help you get out of this place." But Maria wasn't buying it. She had heard promises from officials before. Right after her husband Roberto died, people had shown up at her door with clipboards and big smiles, promising all kinds of help. But when it came time to actually do something, they all disappeared. "Help?" She laughed bitterly. "You want to help? Where were you 3 months ago when we got kicked out of our apartment? Where were you when I was calling every number I could find, begging for assistance?" Sofia, the oldest daughter, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, who is this man?" she whispered. He's nobody, Maria said, not taking her eyes off David. Just another person who thinks he knows what's best for us? David felt the weight of her anger, and he understood it completely. This woman had been let down by the system over and over again. Why should she trust him now? You're right to be suspicious, David said. I probably would be too if I were in your situation. But please, just give me 5 minutes to explain what I can do for you. Little Miguel started coughing again, a deep, rattling sound that made David wince. The boy tried to cover his mouth with his hand, but the coughing just got worse. Maria rubbed his back gently, but David could see the worry in her face. How long has he been coughing like that? David asked. A few weeks, Maria admitted. It started when the weather got colder. David looked around the hut again. The mold on the walls, the dampness, the lack of heat, this place was making the little boy sick. Maybe it was making all of them sick. Maria, David said carefully, I work for the county social services department. We have emergency housing, programs for families in crisis. Clean, safe places where you and your children can stay while we help you get back on your feet. And what's the catch? Maria asked. Nothing in this world is free, especially not from the government. There's no catch, David said. It's a program designed exactly for situations like yours. Families who have lost their homes through no fault of their own, Maria shook her head. I've heard this before. They promise you help, then they take your kids away because you're unfit or unstable, then they put your children in foster care with strangers while you jump through a million hoops trying to prove you deserve them back. Carlos, the middle child, looked back and forth between his mother and this stranger. He didn't understand all the words they were using, but he could feel the tension in the air. He pressed closer to his mother's side. I understand your fear. David said, but I'm not here to separate your family. I'm here to keep you together. The emergency housing I'm talking about, it's for the whole family. You would all stay together. In some homeless shelter where we have to follow a million rules and be out on the street by 8 in the morning? Maria asked. No, David said. These are family units. Small apartments where you have your own space and your own key. You can come and go as you please. For the first time since he'd arrived, David saw a flicker of something other than suspicion in Maria's eyes. Hope, maybe, or at least curiosity. Why should I believe you? She asked. David thought about how to answer that question. He could show her his badge and his credentials, but those were just pieces of paper. He could quote statistics and program guidelines, but that wasn't what she needed to hear. Instead, he decided to tell her the truth. When I was 7 years old, David said, my dad left and my mom couldn't handle taking care of me and my little sister. We ended up living in our car for 3 months. I remember being so hungry that I used to steal crackers from the gas station just so my sister would have something to eat. Maria's expression softened slightly. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal. A social worker named Mrs. Patterson found us, David continued. She could have taken us away from our mom and put us in separate foster homes. Instead, she helped us find a place to live and help my mom get a job. She saved our family. And that's why you do this job? Maria asked. That's exactly why I do this job, David said. Because I know what it feels like to be where you are right now. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person who's willing to actually help instead of just making promises. Miguel's coughing got worse, and David could see that the little boy was struggling to catch his breath. This decided it for him. Maria, I need to be honest with you about something, David said. Your son needs medical attention. This environment isn't safe for any of you, but especially not for him. His cough sounds like it could be developing into something serious. Maria looked down at Miguel and David could see the fear in her face. She had been trying to ignore how sick her youngest child was getting, but hearing it from someone else made it real. I don't have money for a doctor, she whispered. The emergency housing program includes medical care, David explained. There's a clinic right in the building. Miguel could see a doctor today. Today? Maria's voice was barely audible. Today, David confirmed. Within the hour if we leave now. Maria was quiet for a long time, weighing her options. Stay here in this terrible place where her children were slowly getting sicker and hungrier, or trust this stranger who might be lying about everything. Sophia spoke up quietly. Mama, I'm scared Miguel is really sick. Carlos nodded. His cough sounds different than before. Maria looked at her 3 children, Sophia trying so hard to be brave, Carlos watching everything, with worried eyes, and little Miguel struggling just to breathe normally. She thought about Roberto and what he would want her to do. He would want her to take care of their children, no matter what it took. If I go with you, Maria said slowly, and this turns out to be some kind of trick, what happens then? Then you leave, David said simply. Nobody can force you to stay anywhere you don't want to be. You're not a prisoner. You're not giving up your rights as a parent, you're just accepting help. And if the place is as bad as this one? Then I'll personally help you find somewhere better, David promised. Maria looked around the hut one more time, at the moldy walls, the dirt floor, the plastic bags that held everything they owned. She thought about the piece of moldy bread she had been planning to save for dinner, and how grateful she had felt to have even that. This wasn't living. This was just surviving, barely. Okay, she said finally. We'll come with you. David felt a wave of relief wash over him. You're making the right choice, Maria. I promise you won't regret this. I hope you're right, Maria said, standing up and brushing the dirt off her clothes. Because if you're wrong, we have nowhere else to go. She looked at her children and tried to smile. Come on, kids, let's pack our things. But as they started gathering their few possessions, David realized something that broke his heart all over again. When Maria said, pack your things, there really wasn't much to pack at all. Maria stood up slowly, her legs shaky from sitting on the cold dirt floor for so long. She looked around the tiny hut that had been their home for months, and for a moment she felt a strange sadness. This terrible place had kept them together when they had nowhere else to go. Now she was about to leave it with a complete stranger. Okay, children, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Let's gather our things. But as the words left her mouth, reality hit her like a punch to the stomach. What things? They had almost nothing left. Everything they once owned, the furniture, the clothes, the toys, the memories had been lost when they were evicted from their apartment. Sophia went to one corner and picked up a plastic grocery bag that held their few pieces of clothing. Carlos grabbed a small backpack that had a broken zipper. Inside was a worn teddy bear and a picture of their father. Miguel just stood there coughing, too weak to help with anything. David watched this heartbreaking scene and realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had told Maria to pack her things like she was going on a vacation, but these people didn't have things to pack. They had nothing. I'm sorry, David said quietly. I didn't mean to sound like ... Like what? Maria snapped, her fear turning into anger. Like we're normal people with normal lives? Like we have suitcases and clothes and all the things that regular families have? David felt ashamed. In his 5 years as a social worker, he had seen poverty before. But something about this family situation was different. Maybe it was how clean the children were despite their circumstances. Maybe it was how polite they were despite being so hungry. They were trying so hard to maintain their dignity in an impossible situation. You know what our things are? Maria continued, her voice getting louder. 1 change of clothes each. A picture of my dead husband. A teddy bear with one eye missing. And a pot that I use to collect rainwater when the roof leaks. That's it. That's everything we own in this world. Sophia looked embarrassed by her mother's outburst. Mama, please don't yell at the nice man. Nice man? Maria turned to look at her daughter. Sophia, you don't know if he's nice or not. You don't know anything about him? None of us do? David could see that Maria was panicking. The reality of leaving with a stranger was hitting her, and all her protective instincts were kicking in. Maria, David said calmly, I understand you're scared. Any good mother would be scared in this situation. Don't you dare tell me what a good mother would do, Maria shouted. A good mother wouldn't let her children live in a place like this. A good mother would have figured out how to keep her family in their home, Carlos started to cry quietly. He had never heard his mother yell like this before. The stress and fear in her voice scared him more than the stranger at their door. Miguel's coughing got worse, probably triggered by all the shouting. He was struggling to catch his breath, and his face was turning red from the effort. Seeing her youngest son in distress brought Maria back to reality. She knelt down and pulled Miguel close, rubbing his back gently until the coughing fit passed. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered to him. "Mama didn't mean to get loud." David waited until things calmed down before speaking again. "Maria, can I ask you something?" She looked up at him with tired eyes. "What? What's your biggest fear about coming with me?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her 3 children, then back at David. "My biggest fear," she said slowly, "is that you're lying? That this is all some trick to get us away from here so you can split us up. That I'll never see my children again." "And what's your second biggest fear?" David asked. "That you're telling the truth," Maria admitted. "That there really is help available, and I've been too proud or too stupid to find it. That my children have been suffering for months when they didn't have to," David nodded. "Both of those fears make perfect sense. But can I tell you what I think the biggest danger is right now?" Maria waited for him to continue. "The biggest danger is staying here," David said gently. "Miguel needs medical attention. All of you need proper food and a safe place to sleep. Winter is coming, and this place won't protect you from the cold." As if to prove his point, a gust of wind rattled the plastic covering one of the holes in the roof. The temperature had been dropping at night, and David could only imagine how cold it got in this hut with no insulation or heat. "You said there are no strings attached to this help," Maria said. "But there are always strings attached. What do you want from us?" "I want you to be safe," David said. "I want your children to have enough food to eat and a warm place to sleep. I want Miguel to see a doctor and get medicine for that cough." "But what do you get out of it?" Maria pressed. "Nobody does anything for free." David thought about how to explain his motivation without sounding like he was making a speech. "I get to sleep at night," he said simply. "If I walk away from here and leave you and your children in this place, I won't be able to sleep. I'll think about Miguel's cough getting worse. I'll think about what happens when winter really hits. I'll think about you scraping mold off bread to feed your kids." Sophia had been listening to every word of this conversation. She was only 10 years old, but she was smart enough to understand what was happening. Her family was in trouble, and this man was offering to help them. "Mama," Sophia said quietly, "maybe we should try." "Sophia, you don't understand," Maria said. "This is adult stuff." "I understand that Miguel is really sick," Sophia replied. "I understand that we're always hungry. I understand that when it rains, we all get wet because the roof has holes in it." Carlos nodded in agreement with his sister. "And I understand that the bread we eat tastes funny and makes my stomach hurt sometimes." Maria looked at her children and realized they understood their situation better than she had given them credit for. They knew they were living in terrible conditions. They were just too loyal to complain. "What if this man is lying?" Maria asked them. "What if he takes us somewhere worse than here?" "Mama," Sophia said with the wisdom of a child who had grown up too fast, "how could anywhere be worse than here?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria looked around the hut again, seeing it through her daughter's eyes. The mold, the dirt floor, the holes in the walls, the complete lack of privacy or comfort or safety. Miguel started coughing again, and this time it sounded even worse than before. His little body shook with each cough, and Maria could see that he was getting weaker. David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Maria, I'm going to call my supervisor and put her on speaker. You can ask her any questions you want about the program. You can verify that everything I'm telling you is true." "You would do that?" Maria asked, surprised. "Of course," David said. "You have every right to check up on me." He dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. "Hello, this is Linda Martinez, supervisor for County Social Services," came a woman's voice from the phone. "Linda, this is David. I'm here with a family that needs emergency housing assistance. The mother has some questions about the program." Would you mind explaining how it works? For the next 10 minutes, Linda patiently answered every question Maria could think of. She explained the emergency housing program, the medical assistance, the job training opportunities, and most importantly, the fact that families stayed together throughout the entire process. "Ma'am," Linda said to Maria, "I want you to know that our goal is to help you become independent again. We're not interested in taking your children away from you. We're interested in helping you build a stable life for them." When the call ended, Maria sat quietly for several minutes. Her children waited patiently for her to make a decision that would change all their lives. Finally, she looked up at David with tears in her eyes. "Okay," she said, "we'll come with you. But if this turns out to be a mistake, I will never forgive myself." "It's not a mistake," David promised. "You're doing the right thing for your children." As they prepared to leave the hut for the last time, Maria took one final look around. Despite everything, this place had been their shelter when they had nowhere else to go. "Thank you," she whispered to the little hut, though she wasn't sure why. Then she picked up Miguel, who was too tired to walk, and followed David toward his truck. Her other two children closed behind her. They were taking the biggest leap of faith of their lives. The walk to David's truck felt like the longest walk of Maria's life. She carried Miguel in her arms, feeling how light he had become over the past few months. His little body should have been heavier, more solid. Instead, he felt fragile, like he might break if she held him too tightly. Sofia walked beside her mother, clutching the plastic bag with their clothes. Carlos stayed close on the other side, carrying his small backpack like it contained precious treasure. None of the children said a word. They could sense how nervous their mother was, and they didn't want to make things worse. David walked ahead of them, clearing branches out of the way and making sure the path was safe. When they reached his truck, he opened the passenger door for Maria and helped her get Miguel settled in her lap. Then he opened the back door for Sofia and Carlos. "Everyone buckled in?" David asked, checking their seatbelts like he was their uncle or family friend. The truck was clean and warm inside. It smelled like coffee and had a small air freshener hanging from the mirror. To the children, who had been living without any comforts for months, these simple things felt like luxury. As David started the engine, Maria felt her stomach flip with nervousness. This was it. They were really leaving. There would be no going back to their little hut in the woods. Whatever happened next, their lives had just changed forever. "How far is this place?" Maria asked as they bumped along the dirt road. "About 45 minutes, David replied. "It's in the city, near downtown." Maria's hands tightened around Miguel. The city. She hadn't been to the city since they lost their apartment. She had been avoiding it because it reminded her too much of her old life, when Roberto was alive and they were a normal family with a normal home. "Will there be a lot of people there?" Sofia asked from the back seat. "Some people," David said. "But you don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. You'll have your own space." As they reached the main road, Carlos pressed his face against the window. He had forgotten what it looked like out here in the real world. There were other cars on the road, houses with lights in the windows, stores with bright signs. It was like waking up from a long, strange dream. "Look, Miguel," Carlos whispered to his little brother. "There's a McDonald's." Miguel lifted his head weakly and looked out the window. His eyes got wide when he saw the golden arches. He hadn't seen a McDonald's in so long that he had almost forgotten they existed. "Can we get a Happy Meal?" Miguel asked in a small, hopeful voice. Maria's heart broke a little. "We don't have money." "For McDonald's, baby?" "Actually," David said, "the emergency program provides meal vouchers for the first week, until we can get you set up with food assistance." "Meal vouchers?" Maria repeated. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "Yeah. They give you cards that work like cash at grocery stores and some restaurants, so you can buy food while we work on getting your other benefits sorted out." Maria stared at David like he had just told her they were going to the moon. "You mean we could actually eat at McDonald's?" "If that's what you want," David said with a smile, "though I'd recommend getting some healthy groceries too." In the back seat, Sofia and Carlos looked at each other with excitement. They hadn't eaten fast food in almost a year. The idea of getting a hamburger and fries seemed impossible, like something that only happened in dreams. As they drove through different neighborhoods, Maria watched the world go by outside her window. She saw families walking together on sidewalks, children playing in yards, people going about their normal lives. She wondered if she and her children would ever be normal again. "David," she said quietly, "what if we can't do this? What if we're too broken to go back to regular life?" David glanced at her, then back at the road. "What makes you think you're broken? Look at us," Maria said. "We've been living like animals. My children have forgotten how to be around other people. I don't even remember how to have a normal conversation with adults anymore." "Maria, you're having a normal conversation with me right now," David pointed out. "That's different. You single quotes re dot dot. I'm what?" Maria thought about it. "You're safe. You don't judge us." "And you think other people will judge you?" "I know they will," Maria said firmly. "People look at homeless families and think we must have done something wrong. They think we're lazy or drug addicts or bad parents." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something? In all my years doing this job, I've learned that the people who judge homeless families the harshest are usually the ones who are just 3 paychecks away from being homeless themselves." "What do you mean?" "I mean, most people are scared of becoming you," David explained. "So they convince themselves that you must have done something to deserve it. Because if they can blame you, then they can believe it won't happen to them." Maria thought about this as they passed through a nice neighborhood with big houses and perfect lawns. But what if they're right? What if I did do something wrong? Like what? David asked. "I don't know," Maria said, her voice getting smaller. "Maybe I should have saved more money. Maybe I should have had a better job. Maybe I should have made Roberto be more careful at work." From the back seat, Sophia spoke up. "Mama, you couldn't have stopped Papa from getting hurt. Accidents happen." Sophia's right, David said. "What happened to your family wasn't your fault. Your husband died in a workplace accident. That's not something you could have prevented or prepared for." "But other families survive things like that," Maria argued. "Other widows don't end up living in the woods with their children." "Other widows have family to help them," David said. "Other widows have savings accounts and life insurance policies. Other widows have job skills that pay enough to afford childcare. You had none of those things, and that doesn't make you a failure." As they entered the city limits, the buildings got taller and the traffic got heavier. Miguel, who had been dozing in his mother's arms, woke up and looked around with wide eyes. "There are so many cars," he whispered. "And so many people," Carlos added. Watching pedestrians walk by on the sidewalks, Sophia was looking at everything with curiosity and a little fear. "Are we going to live in one of those big buildings?" "Sort of," David said. "The family housing is in a smaller building, but yes, it's in the city." Maria felt overwhelmed by all the noise and activity around them. After months of silence in the woods, the city felt too loud, too fast, too much. "I don't know if we belong here," she said to David. "You belong wherever you need to be to keep your family safe and healthy," David replied. "And right now, you need to be somewhere with heat and running water and medical care for Miguel." As if on cue, Miguel started coughing again. The sound was getting worse, more raspy and painful. Maria rubbed his back and felt how warm he was getting. "He's getting a fever," she told David, worry clear in her voice. "We're almost there," David assured her. "The medical clinic is right in the building. We can have someone look at him as soon as we arrive." They turned onto a quieter street lined with smaller apartment buildings and community centers. David pulled into a parking lot in front of a clean, modern-looking building with a sign that read Family Crisis Center. "This is it," David said, turning off the engine. Maria looked at the building through the windshield. It looked normal, safe, nothing like what she had expected a homeless shelter to look like. "It doesn't look scary," Carlos observed from the back seat. "That's because it's not scary," David said. "It's just a place where families can stay while they get back on their feet." But as they sat in the truck looking at their new temporary home, Maria felt a mix of emotions she couldn't sort out. Relief that they were finally somewhere safe. Fear about what would happen next. Guilt about how long she had waited to ask. For help, and underneath it all, a tiny spark of something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Are you ready? David asked gently. Maria looked down at Miguel, who was breathing heavily against her chest. Then she looked back at Sofia and Carlos, who were waiting for her to make the decision for all of them. Yes, she said, though her voice shook a little, we're ready. As they got out of the truck and walked toward the entrance of the family crisis center, Maria realized that this wasn't just a change of address. This was the first step toward getting their lives back. The first night at the Family Crisis Center was the strangest night Maria had experienced in months. For the first time since losing their apartment, she and her children slept in real beds with clean sheets and warm blankets. There was a heater that actually worked, a bathroom with hot water, and a small kitchenette where they could prepare their own meals, but instead of feeling relief, Maria lay awake staring at the ceiling. The room felt too quiet after months of listening to wind and rain through the holes in their hut. The mattress felt too soft after sleeping on the ground. Even the safety felt uncomfortable because she had gotten used to being constantly alert. For danger. Miguel was sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. A doctor at the clinic had examined him that afternoon and given him medicine for his chest infection. His breathing was already quieter, less labored. But Maria couldn't stop watching him, afraid that if she fell asleep, something bad would happen. The next morning brought their first real challenge. A staff member named Rachel knocked on their door at 8 o'clock with a clipboard full of forms and a schedule of appointments. "Good morning, Maria," Rachel said with a bright smile. "I hope you all slept well. We need to get started on your intake process." Maria looked at the papers Rachel was holding and felt overwhelmed before she even saw what was on them. "What kind of intake process?" "And just some paperwork to get you signed up for services," Rachel explained. "Medical records, school enrollment for the children, job placement assistance, housing applications, food assistance, and a few other things." The list seemed to go on forever. Maria had been dealing with government paperwork since Roberto died, and it never seemed to end. Every time she filled out one set of forms, someone else would tell her she needed different forms or additional documents she didn't have. "I don't have most of the documents you probably need," Maria said, feeling defeated before they even started. "That's okay," Rachel said. "We can help you get copies of everything. But we do need to start the process today so we can get your benefits approved as quickly as possible." Sofia was sitting at the small table in their room looking out the window at the city street below. She'd have been quiet all morning, which wasn't like her. Usually she was the one asking questions and trying to take care of her little brothers. "Sofia, are you okay?" Maria asked. Sofia turned away from the window. "Mama, do we have to go to school here?" "Yes, baby. You need to keep up with your education." "But what if the other kids ask where we've been living? What if they find out we were homeless?" Maria felt her heart sink. She hadn't thought about how hard it would be for her children to go back to school after everything they had been through. Sofia was smart and had always done well in school before their world fell apart, but now she seemed scared and ashamed. "You don't have to tell anyone anything you don't want to tell them," Maria said. "But they'll know," Sofia insisted. "They'll know we're different. They'll know we don't belong." Carlos, who had been playing quietly with his teddy bear, looked up. "Will the kids at school make fun of us?" Maria didn't know how to answer that question. Kids could be cruel, especially to children who were different or didn't have the same things they had. Over the next few days, the challenges kept coming. The first time they went to the cafeteria for a meal, Miguel started crying because there were too many people and too much noise. He had gotten used to the quiet of their isolated hut, and the busy cafeteria overwhelmed him. Sofia did start school, but she came home the first day with red eyes from crying. When Maria asked what happened, Sofia said she had forgotten how to talk to other kids her age. "They all know each other already," Sofia explained. They have inside jokes and talk about things I don't understand. And when the teacher asked me to tell the class about myself, I didn't know what to say. What did you say? Maria asked. I said my name and that I was new, that's all. I couldn't think of anything else. Carlos was supposed to start school the next week, but he was getting more anxious every day. He had nightmares about other kids, laughing at his old clothes and worn-out shoes. During the day, he clung to Maria and didn't want to let her out of his sight. Maria herself was struggling more than she wanted to admit. The staff at the crisis center were kind and helpful, but there were so many appointments, so many forms to fill out, so many different people to talk to. Caseworkers, job counselors, housing specialists, medical coordinators. It felt like a full-time job, just keeping track of who she was supposed to meet with and when. And then there were the other families at the center. Some had been there for months and seemed comfortable with the routine. Others, like Maria's family, were new and struggling to adjust. Maria wanted to connect with the other mothers, but she also felt embarrassed about how far her family had fallen. One afternoon, while the children were in the playroom, Maria sat in the common area trying to fill out yet another set of forms. The questions seemed designed to make her feel worse about herself. Employment history for the past 2 years. Reason for housing instability? List all sources of income. She was struggling with a question about her job skills when another woman sat down next to her. Those forms are the worst, aren't they? The woman said. Her name was Janet, and she had been at the center for 6 weeks with her teenage son. I feel like I'm filling out the same information over and over again, Maria said. You are, Janet laughed. Every agency wants their own forms, even though they're all asking for the same basic information. How do you keep track of it all? Honestly? I don't, Janet admitted. I just do my best and hope for good results. Some days are better than others. Maria appreciated Janet's honesty. Most of the staff members were encouraging and positive, which was nice, but sometimes she needed to hear from someone who really understood what she was going through. Can I ask you something? Maria said. Sure. Do you ever feel like this is all your fault? Like if you had been smarter or stronger or better prepared, you wouldn't be here? Janet was quiet for a moment. Every single day, she said finally. But then I remember that my ex-husband emptied our bank account and disappeared, leaving me with a mountain of debt I didn't even know existed. And I remind myself that I didn't choose to be here, but I am choosing to do whatever it takes to get my son and me back on our feet. That evening, David stopped by to check on them. He had been visiting every few days to see how they were adjusting and to help with any problems that came up. How are things going? He asked Maria while the children played in the next room. Honestly? It's harder than I expected, Maria admitted. In what way? Everything. The paperwork, the appointments, watching my kids struggle to fit in. I thought once we got here, things would be easier. But it feels like we're still fighting every day. Just in a different way. David nodded. That's completely normal. Recovery isn't a straight line. There are going to be setbacks and difficult days. But what if we can't do it? Maria asked. What if we're too damaged to go back to normal life? Maria, can I tell you something? 3 months ago, you were keeping your family together in an abandoned hut with no resources and no help. You were making sure your children were fed and safe in an impossible situation. If you could do that, you can handle anything. But this feels different. Back there, we only had to worry about surviving. Here, we have to figure out how to live again. And that's exactly what you're doing, David said. You're learning how to live again. It's going to take time, and it's going to be messy sometimes. But you're already doing it. That night, as Maria tucked her children into their beds, Miguel looked up at her with his big brown eyes. Mama, are we going to be okay? He asked. Maria looked at her youngest child, who had been through so much in his short life. She thought about Sophia struggling at school, Carlos afraid to leave her side, and her own daily battle with paperwork and appointments, and the constant feeling that she was failing at everything. But she also thought about Miguel's clear breathing, about the warm room they were sleeping in, about the hot meals they had eaten that day. She thought about David's faith in them and Janet's friendship and the small steps forward they had made. Yes, baby, she said, smoothing his hair. We're going to be okay. It might take some time, but we're going to be okay. And for the first time since Roberto died, Maria actually believed it might be true. 6 weeks had passed since that first terrifying night at the Family Crisis Center. Maria woke up one morning and realized something had changed, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The room felt familiar now instead of foreign. The sounds of the city outside their window had become background noise instead of constant distraction. Miguel was sitting at the small table, coloring in a book that one of the volunteers had given him. His cough was completely gone, and his cheeks had color in them again. He had gained 8 pounds since their arrival, and his clothes were starting to fit him properly. Look, Mama, Miguel said, holding up his drawing. I made a picture of our new house. Maria looked at the colorful crayon drawing. It showed a square building with windows and a door, and 4 stick figures standing in front of it. Above the building, Miguel had drawn a bright yellow sun and fluffy white clouds. It's beautiful, baby, Maria said, sitting down next to him. Tell me about it. That's you, and that's me, and that's Sofia and Carlos, Miguel explained, pointing to each stick figure. And see? We're all smiling because we have a house now. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time in almost a year, her youngest child was thinking about the future with hope instead of fear. Sofia burst through the door, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. For the past 2 weeks, she had been coming home from school with excitement instead of tears. Mama, guess what happened today? Sofia said, her eyes shining. What happened? Mrs. Henderson, my art teacher, wants to put my painting in the school art show. She said it's the best work she's seen from a 5th grader in years. Maria's heart swelled with pride. Before they lost their home, Sofia had always loved to draw and paint. But during those dark months in the hut, there had been no art supplies, no time for creativity, no reason to imagine beautiful things. That's wonderful, honey. What did you paint? Sofia's face lit up. I painted our old hut in the woods, but I made it look magical. Like a fairy house. Mrs. Henderson said I took something sad and made it beautiful. Carlos came running in behind. His sister, his face flushed with excitement. He had finally started school 3 weeks ago, and after a rough first week he was beginning to find his place. Mama, I made a friend, Carlos announced. His name is Tommy, and he invited me to his birthday party this weekend. Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Both of her older children were not just surviving at their new schools, they were starting to thrive. That's amazing, Carlos. Do you want to go to the party? Yes. Tommy said they're going to have pizza and cake and play games. I've never been to a birthday party before. Maria realized with a pang that this was true. Before Roberto died, they had been so focused on work and paying bills that there hadn't been much time for social activities. And after he died, birthday parties had been impossible to even think about. We'll figure out a way to make it work, Maria promised. That afternoon, Maria had an appointment with Janet Rodriguez, a job counselor at the crisis center. Maria had been dreading these meetings because she felt so out of touch with the working world. But today felt different. Maria, I have some good news, Janet said as soon as Maria sat down. Do you remember that interview you had at the medical clinic last week? The one where I thought I completely messed up? Maria asked. That's the one they called this morning. They want to offer you the position. Maria stared at Janet in shock. They do? Part-time to start, with the possibility of going full-time once you complete your medical assistant certification renewal. The hours work perfectly with the children's school schedule. Maria felt like she might faint. A real job, with regular hours and steady pay. She hadn't dared to hope it was possible. But I haven't worked in almost 2 years, Maria said. What if I've forgotten everything? You haven't forgotten anything, Janet assured her. You just need to trust yourself again. The clinic manager was impressed with your experience and your attitude. She said you seemed genuinely caring and dedicated. That evening, Maria called David to share the news. He had become more than just their caseworker. He was a friend who had seen them through their darkest days. Maria, that's fantastic. David's voice was full of genuine excitement. How do you feel about it? Scared, Maria admitted, but also hopeful. I haven't felt hopeful about the future in so long. You should feel hopeful. You've come so far from where you were 6 weeks ago. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you help us? I mean, really help us, not just do the minimum your job required? David was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when I told you about Mrs. Patterson, the social worker who helped my family when I was a kid? Yes, she didn't just find us housing and fill out forms. She believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. She saw potential in my mom when my mom only saw failure. I became a social worker because I wanted to be Mrs. Patterson for other families. And you were, Maria said softly. You were our Mrs. Patterson. That weekend, something magical happened. Carlos went to his first birthday party, and when Maria picked him up, he was glowing with happiness. He had played games, eaten cake, and felt like a normal kid for the first time in months. Sophia's painting was selected not just for the school art show, but for the district-wide competition. When Maria saw the painting displayed in the school hallway with a small placard that read, Sofia Santos, Grade 5, she cried right there in front of all the other parents, but the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria had been attending a support group for single mothers at the crisis center. She had been going reluctantly, mostly because it was required and she rarely spoke during the meetings. This week, a new woman joined the group. Her name was Patricia, and she had just arrived at the center with her baby daughter. Patricia was where Maria had been 6 weeks ago, scared, ashamed, and convinced that she had failed her child. During the meeting, Patricia started crying as she told her story. Her husband had left her when the baby was born, taking all their savings. She had been evicted from her apartment and had been living in her car with the baby for 2 weeks. Before someone told her about the crisis center, I feel like such a failure, Patricia sobbed. What kind of mother lets her baby live in a car? Without thinking, Maria reached over and took Patricia's hand. The kind of mother who does whatever it takes to keep her baby safe, Maria said firmly. The kind of mother who doesn't give up even when everything falls apart? The kind of mother who accepts help when she finds it. Patricia looked up at Maria with tears in her eyes. But how do you get through it? How do you keep going when everything feels impossible? Maria thought about how to answer. 6 weeks ago, she would have said she had no idea. But now she realized she did know. You take it one day at a time, Maria said. You celebrate the small victories. You ask for help when you need it. And you remember that being here doesn't make you a failure, it makes you a survivor. After the meeting, Patricia came up to Maria. Thank you for what you said. It helped. It helped me too, Maria realized. Saying it out loud helped me believe it. That night, as Maria tucked her children into bed, she looked around their small room at the crisis center. It wasn't their permanent home, but it was safe and warm and filled with hope. Miguel was sleeping peacefully, his breathing clear and strong. Carlos was dreaming, probably about birthday parties and new friends. Sofia had fallen asleep with a sketchbook in her hands, always creating something beautiful. For the first time since Roberto died, Maria could picture their future. It wouldn't be the same as their old life, but it could be good. Different, but good. She thought about her new job starting Monday, about Sofia's art show next week, about Carlos's growing confidence. She thought about Patricia and how helping someone else had helped her find her own strength. They were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to build something new and beautiful from the pieces of their broken life. And for the first time in almost a year, Maria fell asleep with a smile on her face. 3 months after starting her job at the medical clinic, Maria stood in the living room of their new apartment holding a key in her hand, their very own key to their very own home. After almost a year of having no permanent address, they finally had a place that belonged to them. The apartment wasn't fancy. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from the crisis center. The carpet was a little worn and the kitchen appliances were older than Maria would have liked. But it had something. Their hut in the woods never had, and something the crisis center couldn't provide. It was theirs. "Can we really live here, Mama?" Miguel asked, running from room to room with boundless energy. His transformation over the past few months had been remarkable. The pale, sick little boy who used to cough constantly was now a healthy, active child who seemed to grow taller every week. "Yes, baby," Maria said, still hardly believing it herself. "This is our home now." Sophia was standing in what would be her bedroom, measuring the walls with her eyes. "Can I paint something on this wall, like a mural?" "We'll have to ask the landlord," Maria said. "But maybe we can find some removable decorations that you can design." Sophia beamed. Her confidence had grown tremendously since her artwork had been featured in the district art show. 3 of her pieces had sold to local collectors, and the money was sitting in a savings account Maria had opened for her daughter's future. Carlos was examining every inch of the bathroom, fascinated by the fact that they had their own shower, their own toilet, their own sink. "Nobody else will use our bathroom?" he asked for the 3rd time. "Nobody else," Maria confirmed. "Okay, just our family." The simple concept of privacy was still new to all of them. At the crisis center, they had shared common areas with other families. Before that, in the hut, they had been crammed into one tiny space with no privacy at all. Having separate bedrooms felt like the height of luxury. David arrived an hour later with a truck full of donated furniture. Over the past month, word had spread through the community about the Santos family's situation. People had started dropping off items at the crisis center, a kitchen table and chairs, a couch that was still in good condition, beds for the children, and boxes of household items they would need to start their new life. "I can't believe people would give us all this," Maria said as David and 2 volunteers carried in a dresser for Sophia's room. "People like to help when they know their donations are going to a family that will really appreciate them," David replied. "And your story has touched a lot of hearts." Maria felt uncomfortable when David talked about her story. She still didn't think of herself as special or inspiring. She was just a mother who had done what any mother would do, whatever it took to keep her children safe and together. As they unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, Maria marveled at how different this felt from moving into the crisis center. That day had been about survival and desperation. This day was about hope and new beginnings. The children were giddy with excitement, claiming their spaces and planning how they would arrange their few possessions. Miguel had his own bed for the first time in his life. Before they lost their apartment, he had shared a room with Carlos. Now he had a small corner of the living room that Maria had sectioned off with a colorful room divider by evening. The apartment was starting to look like a home. They had working electricity, running water, heat, and all the basic necessities that most people took for granted. But to the Santos family, these simple things felt miraculous. "Mama," Sophia said as they prepared dinner in their own kitchen, "do you think Papa would be proud of us?" Maria paused in the middle of stirring a pot of soup. It was the first time in months that one of the children had mentioned Roberto without crying. "I think Papa would be very proud," Maria said carefully. "Proud of how brave you've all been, how hard you've worked to get through this difficult time." "Do you think he can see us now?" Carlos asked. "I don't know, honey. But if he can, I think he would be amazed at how strong his children are." That night, Maria called her supervisor at the medical clinic with news she had been hoping to share for weeks. "Dr. Williams, this is Maria Santos. I wanted to let you know that I passed my medical assistant certification exam." "Maria, that's wonderful," Dr. Williams sounded genuinely pleased. "I knew you would. You've been such a dedicated employee these past few months. Does this mean I can apply for the full-time position that's opening up? I was hoping you would ask. The job is yours if you want it. Better pay, better benefits, and you'd be working with our pediatric patients. I think you'd be perfect for it." Maria felt her heart race. A full-time job with benefits meant real financial security for the first time since Roberto died. It meant they could start planning for the future instead of just surviving day to day. "I want it," Maria said without hesitation. "When would I start?" "Next Monday, if that works for you." After hanging up the phone, Maria sat in her new living room and looked around at her sleeping children. Miguel was curled up in his new bed, hugging the teddy bear that had been with him through everything. Sofia and Carlos were sharing the larger bedroom, and she could hear them whispering and giggling together. 6 months ago, she had been scraping mold off bread to feed these same children. Now they were living in their own apartment. She had a good job with room for advancement, and they were building toward a stable future. The next weekend, Maria did something she hadn't done in over a year. She invited someone over for dinner. Janet, her friend from the crisis center who had been such a support during those difficult early weeks, came over with her teenage son. "Maria, this place is beautiful," Janet said, admiring the cozy living room and the children's artwork hanging on the walls. "It's not much," Maria said, but she was proud of what they had created. "Are you kidding? This is everything. This is what we were all working toward." As they sat around the kitchen table sharing a home-cooked meal, Maria realized how far they had come. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined hosting dinner for friends. She couldn't have imagined having friends, or a kitchen table, or enough food to share with others. "Maria," Janet said as they were cleaning up after dinner, "I have to tell you something. Watching you get back on your feet has given me hope for my own situation. You've shown me that it's possible to build something good from the worst circumstances." "We helped each other," Maria said. "I never could have made it through those first weeks without you." That night, after Janet and her son had gone home, Maria tucked her children into their beds in their own bedrooms in their own apartment. As she turned off the lights, Sofia called out to her, "Mama?" "Yes, honey? Are we normal now?" Maria thought about the question. Were they normal? They were a single-parent family living in a modest apartment, working hard to make ends meet and plan for the future. In that sense, they were probably more normal than they had ever been. "We're us," Maria said finally. "And that's exactly who we're supposed to be." Later that evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook. For the first time in months, she was making plans that extended beyond the next week or month. She was thinking about Sofia's college fund, about Carlos's interest in sports, about Miguel's education. She was thinking about maybe taking night classes herself, about career advancement, about maybe even buying a house someday. The future, which had seemed impossible just a few months ago, was now full of possibilities. As she wrote in her notebook, Maria glanced around the small apartment that had become their sanctuary. It wasn't the life she had planned when she married Roberto, but it was a good life. A life they had fought for and earned and built together. And for the first time since Roberto died, Maria wasn't just surviving. She was living. 1 year later, Maria stood in front of a room full of new families at the Family Crisis Center. Her hands were shaking slightly as she looked out at the faces staring back at her. Some looked hopeful, others looked defeated. All of them looked scared. She recognized that look because she had worn it herself not so long ago. "My name is Maria Santos," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. 30 months ago, a social worker found me and my 3 children living in an abandoned hut in the woods. We were eating moldy bread because that was all we had. I thought my life was over. I thought I had failed my children in every way possible. A woman in the back row was crying quietly, holding a baby against her chest. Maria's heart went out to her, remembering the overwhelming shame and fear she had felt during her first days at the center. "Today I live in my own apartment with my children. I have a full-time job that I love. My daughter's artwork hangs in galleries around the city. My middle son plays on his school's soccer team. My youngest is healthy and happy and dreams about becoming a teacher when he grows up." A man near the front raised his hand. "How long did it take?" he asked. "To get back on your feet, I mean." Maria thought about the question. "That depends on what you mean by back on my feet." We moved into our own apartment after 3 months here. I got a steady job after 2 months, but really recovering. Really believing that we deserved good things and that the future could be bright. That took longer. "How much longer?" the man pressed. "I'm still working on it," Maria admitted with a smile. but every day gets a little easier. A young mother with 2 small children spoke up. What was the hardest part? Accepting. Help, Maria said without hesitation. I was so proud, so convinced that asking for help meant I was a failure as a mother. I thought if I could just try harder, work longer hours, sacrifice more, I could fix everything myself. But you know what I learned? Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Every single person in this room is here because they love their children enough to do whatever it takes to keep them safe. That doesn't make you failures, that makes you heroes. After the meeting, several families approached Maria with questions. She answered each one patiently, remembering how desperate she had been for reassurance during those first terrifying weeks. Teenage boy who had been sitting quietly in the corner came up to her last. My mom died 6 months ago, he said. I've been living with my little sister in our car. The people here say I'm too young to be her guardian, but I don't want us to be separated. Maria's heart broke for this boy who was trying to be strong for his sister the same way she had tried to be strong for her children. What's your name? She asked. Danny, and this is my sister Lily. He gestured to a little girl hiding behind his legs. Danny, how old are you? 16. But I've been taking care of Lily since Mom got sick. I know how to do everything. I can cook and clean and help her with homework. Maria knelt down to Lily's level. Hi, Lily. How old are you? 5, Lily whispered. Maria looked back up at Danny. The people here aren't trying to separate you because they're mean. They're trying to find the best solution for both of you. Have you talked to David Rodriguez, the social worker? The tall guy with the beard? Yeah, he said he's working on finding us a placement together. Trust him, Maria said firmly. David saved my family. If he says he's working on keeping you together, he means it. Don't give up, okay? Danny nodded, and Maria could see hope flickering. In his eyes, for the first time since the conversation began, later that evening, Maria drove home to her apartment, stopping at the grocery store on the way. It was still strange to walk through the aisles and buy whatever food her family needed without worrying about whether she had enough money. The financial security from her full-time job had changed everything. When she got home, she found Sophia at the kitchen table working on her homework. At 11 years old, Sophia was an honor roll student who had been accepted into a special art program at the middle school she would attend next year. How was school today, honey? Maria asked, unpacking groceries. Really good, Mrs. Chun said. My portfolio is ready for the scholarship application. If I get it, I can go to art camp this summer. Maria felt a surge of pride. Art camp had been completely impossible to even imagine a year ago. Now it was within reach. Carlos burst through. The front door, his soccer cleats clicking on the kitchen floor. Mama, guess what? Coach Martinez said I might make varsity next year if I keep improving. That's wonderful, Carlos. How was practice? Amazing. Tommy's dad said he'd give me a ride to the tournament this weekend if you can't get off work. Maria marveled at how normal this conversation was. Her children had friends, activities, dreams for the future. They were living the kind of childhood she had wanted to give them but had thought was lost forever. Miguel came running in from his bedroom, carrying a book. Mama, will you read to me? Of course, baby. What book did you choose? Miguel held up a picture book about a little boy who wanted to be a teacher. This one, because I want to help kids learn things, just like Miss Rodriguez helped me. As Maria read to Miguel that night, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The terror of those first nights in the woods, the shame of accepting help, the overwhelming challenges of getting back on their feet, and, finally, the joy of building a new life. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Heard you spoke at the center today. How did it go? She texted back. It felt good to give back. Thank you for everything you did for us. You did all the hard work, David replied. I just pointed you in the right direction. But Maria knew it was more than that. David had seen something in her family when they couldn't see it in themselves. He had believed they were worth saving when they felt worthless. He had given them not just shelter and resources, but hope. The next morning, Maria woke up early and made breakfast for her children. As they sat around their kitchen table eating pancakes and talking about their plans for the day, she realized this was the life she had been fighting for all along. "Mama," Miguel said, syrup dripping from his fork, "are you happy?" The question caught Maria off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her if she was happy? When was the last time she had even thought about happiness instead of just survival? "Yes, baby," she said, and realized with surprise that it was completely true. "I'm very happy." "Good," Miguel said seriously, "because you smile a lot more now than you used to." That afternoon, Maria sat at her desk at the medical clinic during her lunch break. She was working on a thank you note to the community group that had donated furniture for their apartment. As she wrote, she reflected on how much her perspective had changed. A year ago, she had been focused on what she had lost: her husband, her home, her security, her sense of identity as a capable adult. Now she focused on what she had gained, strength she didn't know she possessed. Friendships forged through shared struggle, a deeper appreciation for simple pleasures, and an unshakable faith in her children's resilience. She had learned that rock bottom could be a foundation to build on, that accepting help didn't make her weak, it made her wise, that her children were stronger than she had ever imagined, and that sometimes the worst thing that could happen to you could also be the beginning of something beautiful. When she got home that evening, Sophia was in the living room working on a new painting. This one showed a small wooden hut surrounded by tall trees, but instead of looking dark and frightening, Sophia had painted it with warm colors and magical details like something from a fairy tale. "It's beautiful, honey," Maria said. "What made you decide to paint that?" Sophia looked up from her work. "I wanted to remember where we came from, but also show that even scary places can have beauty in them if you look for it the right way." Maria hugged her daughter tightly, amazed by the wisdom in those words. That night, as she tucked her children into their beds in their own rooms in their own home, Maria thought about the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but they had made it. They had not just survived. They had thrived. And tomorrow, she would wake up and continue building the life they deserved, one day at a time.